She thought she was safe. After 36 years of marriage, after raising 3 children together, after weathering every storm life could throw at them, Sarah believed her husband Michael loved her unconditionally. She was wrong. Dead wrong. The flames that consumed the 2-story house on Maple Street didn't just destroy wood and brick. They destroyed everything neighbors thought they knew about the couple who lived there. The woman they found in the bedroom, burned beyond recognition, had been hiding something so deeply personal that when her husband discovered it, he decided she deserved to die. For 36 years, he thought he knew his wife. But one late-night discovery shattered everything and ended in murder. What could drive a man to kill the woman he'd shared his life with for more than 3 decades? Was it betrayal, delusion, or something far more twisted? The answer will shock you. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Michael and Sarah Williams met when they were barely out of high school. She was 18, working at the local diner, dreaming of something bigger than their small Ohio town. He was 20, fresh out of trade school, with calloused hands and big promises about the life they'd build together. Their wedding photo shows 2 young faces full of hope that would slowly decay over the decades that followed. 36 years, that's how long they were married. 13,140 days of sharing the same bed, the same dreams, the same disappointments. To everyone in their neighborhood, they were the couple that made it work. When other marriages fell apart around them, when friends got divorced and families split up, Michael and Sarah Williams endured. They endured Michael's drinking problem in their 20s. They endured Sarah's struggle with depression after their second miscarriage. They endured the financial strain when Michael lost his job at the factory and they had to refinance their house just to keep the lights on. They raised 3 children in that house on Maple Street. Jennifer, now 34, a nurse living 2 states away. Thomas, 31, an accountant who visited every Christmas with his own family, and Lisa, the youngest at 28, who'd moved to California and barely called anymore. All 3 children would later tell investigators the same thing. Their parents seemed fine. Not happy exactly, but fine. Stable. Predictable. But stability can be a prison when it's built on lies. Michael Williams worked construction for most of their marriage. He was the kind of man who believed in traditional roles, traditional values, traditional ways of doing things. Sarah cooked dinner every night at 6:30. She did the laundry on Wednesdays and Saturdays. She managed the household finances because Michael said numbers gave him headaches. From the outside, they looked like a couple from a different era, holding on to old-fashioned ideals in a modern world. Sarah had worked too for a while. She'd been a substitute teacher at the local elementary school, filling in when the regular teachers got sick or took personal days. The children loved her gentle voice, her patient way of explaining difficult concepts. But Michael didn't like her working. He said it wasn't necessary, that it took time away from their family. So after 10 years, Sarah quit teaching and devoted herself entirely to being a wife and mother. What nobody knew was that Sarah had been living with a secret for decades, a secret so fundamental to who she was that she'd buried it so deep, she'd almost convinced herself it wasn't real. Almost. The neighbors all described them the same way. Quiet, private, but pleasant enough. Sarah would wave from her garden where she grew tomatoes and roses. Michael would nod politely when he mowed the lawn every Saturday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. They attended St. Mark's Methodist Church most Sundays, sitting in the same pew they'd claimed 30 years earlier. They paid their taxes on time, kept their property neat, and never caused any trouble. But behind closed doors, cracks had been forming for years. Michael had become increasingly controlling as he aged. He checked Sarah's phone records, questioned her about every trip to the grocery store, and insisted she account for every dollar she spent. He said it was because he loved her, because he wanted to protect her from a dangerous world. Sarah accepted his explanations because that's what wives of her generation were taught to do. You made your marriage work. You didn't complain. You didn't seek help. You endured. The children noticed changes in their mother over the years, but they attributed it to normal aging, to the quiet resignation that settles over many long marriages. Sarah seemed smaller somehow, her voice softer, her opinions fewer. When they called home, she would put Michael on the phone quickly, as if she wasn't comfortable talking for long. When they visited, she bustled around the kitchen, keeping busy, avoiding deep conversations. Jennifer, their oldest daughter, would later tell police that she wished she'd asked more questions. She wished she'd pushed harder when her mother seemed distant or sad. But hindsight is a cruel companion in tragedy. The Williams marriage wasn't violent in the traditional sense. Michael never hit Sarah, never screamed at her, never threatened her with physical harm. Instead, he controlled her through emotional manipulation, through financial dependence, through the slow erosion of her self-worth. Death by 1,000 small cuts, each one barely noticeable until the victim realizes they're bleeding out. Think about your own relationships for a moment. How well do you really know the person sleeping next to you? How many secrets do we all carry, locked away in the deepest corners of our hearts? Sarah Williams carried hers for 36 years, and it would ultimately cost her everything. The irony is devastating. She'd spent decades hiding her true self to preserve her marriage, never knowing that the very act of hiding was what would destroy it. Love, real love, requires honesty. But fear had convinced Sarah that honesty would cost her everything she'd built. She was wrong about that too. Her silence would cost her far more than her truth ever could have. If you're still watching, drop a comment with 36 years. Let's see how many are locked in right now. It started with insomnia. Michael Williams had always been a heavy sleeper, but at 58, his body began betraying him in small ways. His back ached from decades of construction work. His joints protested when he climbed out of bed, and increasingly, his mind wouldn't quiet enough to let him rest through the night. It was during one of these restless nights in late September that Michael's world began to unravel. He'd gotten up around 2 in the morning, padding to the kitchen for a glass of water and one of the pain pills his doctor had prescribed for his chronic back problems. The house was silent except for the familiar sounds of an old home settling, the creak of floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant tick of the grandfather clock his father had left him. That's when he heard it. The sound of the upstairs bathroom door closing, followed by the soft rush of water in the pipes. Sarah must be having trouble sleeping too, he thought. She'd been restless lately, tossing and turning, sometimes getting up multiple times during the night. He'd asked her about it, but she'd brushed off his concerns with excuses about drinking too much tea before bed or stress about their daughter Lisa's recent divorce. Michael should have gone back to bed. He should have minded his own business. But something made him pause at the bottom of the stairs, listening to the sounds from the bathroom above. And that's when he heard something that didn't make sense, something that would replay in his mind obsessively for the next 3 weeks until it drove him to commit an unthinkable act. He heard the sound of someone urinating while standing up. At first, Michael convinced himself he was imagining things. The old pipes in their house made strange noises. Maybe it was just water running through the system in an unusual way. Maybe Sarah was cleaning the toilet or running water in the sink. There had to be a logical explanation, but the sound was unmistakable. The distinct splash of urine hitting water from a height that could only come from someone standing, someone with anatomy that should have made that impossible for his wife. Michael crept halfway up the stairs, his heart pounding in his chest. The bathroom door was closed, but he could hear movement inside. When Sarah emerged 5 minutes later, she seemed startled to find him on the stairs. "Couldn't sleep," she whispered, trying not to wake him up even though he was clearly already awake. "Just needed some water," he replied, studying her face in the dim hallway light. She looked normal. Tired, maybe a little older than he remembered, but normal. Sarah, his wife of 36 years. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few days, Michael became hyper-aware of Sarah's bathroom habits. He started tracking when she went, how long she stayed, what sounds he could hear through the door. He felt ridiculous, like a crazy person, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental about his reality had shifted. 2 nights later, he heard it again. The same unmistakable sound. This time, he was certain. Michael's mind began racing with impossible possibilities. Was his wife hiding something from him? Could she be? The thought was so absurd, he couldn't even complete it in his own mind. But the evidence of his ears was undeniable. He started watching Sarah more carefully during the day, looking for signs he might have missed, clues that would explain what he thought he was hearing. He studied her body when she changed clothes, but 36 years of marriage had made them comfortable with privacy and modesty. Sarah had always been careful about her personal habits, always private about her body. He'd attributed it to old-fashioned shyness, to the way women of her generation were raised to be modest. Now he wondered if there was another reason entirely. The paranoia grew like a cancer in Michael's mind. He began interpreting everything through the lens of suspicion. Why had Sarah never wanted to shower together? Why did she always change clothes in the bathroom instead of the bedroom? Why had she been so reluctant to discuss intimate matters throughout their marriage? Michael started doing research on the internet, something he'd never been comfortable with before. He searched for explanations, for conditions that might allow a woman to urinate standing up. He found articles about medical anomalies, about intersex conditions, about transgender people. Each search led him deeper into a rabbit hole of confusion and growing rage. The rage surprised him. He'd expected to feel concerned, maybe confused, but the anger that built in his chest was white-hot and consuming. He felt betrayed, lied to, made a fool of. If Sarah was hiding something this fundamental about herself, what else had she been lying about? Was their entire marriage built on deception? 3 weeks after the first incident, Michael confronted Sarah directly. It was a Saturday morning. They were sitting at the kitchen table sharing coffee and the newspaper like they had thousands of times before. Sarah was reading the local news section, occasionally commenting on community events or people they knew. She seemed relaxed, content even. The ordinariness of the moment made what happened next feel even more surreal. "I need to ask you something," Michael said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Sarah looked up from the newspaper, concern flickering across her face. "What is it?" "I've been hearing things at night, in the bathroom. Things that don't make sense." The color drained from Sarah's face so quickly that Michael knew instantly his suspicions were confirmed. She didn't even need to answer. Her reaction told him everything. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered, but her voice was shaking. "Yes, you do," Michael said, standing up from the table. "You know exactly what I mean. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Sarah stood too, backing toward the kitchen counter as if she needed something solid behind her. "Michael, please. You're scaring me." "I'm scaring you?" His voice rose to a shout. "I'm scaring you? You've been lying to me for 36 years, and I'm scaring you?" The fight that followed was unlike anything they'd ever experienced in their marriage. Michael demanded explanations. Sarah tried to deny, then to minimize, then finally broke down in tears and begged him to understand. She tried to explain feelings she'd never been able to put into words, a truth about herself that she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten it existed. But Michael wasn't interested in understanding. He was interested in feeling like the victim, like the one who'd been wronged. In his mind, Sarah's lifelong struggle with her identity became a personal betrayal against him. Her decades of silent suffering became an elaborate deception designed to make him look foolish. "How many people know?" he demanded. "How many people have been laughing at me behind my back?" "No one knows," Sarah cried. "No one. I never told anyone. I never did anything. I just lived with it. I thought if I ignored it, if I never acted on it, it would go away." But Michael was beyond reason. He'd built his identity around being the man in their relationship, the provider, the protector, the one in control. Sarah's revelation shattered his sense of masculinity in ways he couldn't articulate or process. The argument lasted for hours. It ended with Sarah locked in their bedroom sobbing, while Michael sat in his garage, drinking beer and staring at the wall, his mind cycling through 36 years of marriage, reinterpreting every memory through this new, unwelcome lens. Pause here for a moment. What would you have done if you were in his shoes? How would you react if someone you'd loved for decades revealed something that fundamentally challenged everything you thought you knew about them? Drop your thoughts in the comments. For the next week, they barely spoke. Sarah tried to pretend everything was normal, cooking his meals, doing his laundry, maintaining the routines that had defined their life together. But Michael watched her with cold, calculating eyes, and Sarah could feel his hatred growing stronger each day. She started making plans to leave. She opened her own bank account, using money she'd saved from grocery shopping over the years. She researched apartments in the next town over. She even called Jennifer, her oldest daughter, and asked hypothetical questions about staying with her family for a while. But Sarah moved too slowly, and Michael's rage was growing faster than her escape plans. On the night of October 15th, everything came to a head. October 15th was a Wednesday. Sarah remembered that detail later, when investigators asked her to reconstruct the timeline of that terrible night. Wednesday had always been laundry day in the Williams house. She'd spent the afternoon folding clothes and putting them away, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in a marriage that felt like it was crumbling around her. Michael had been drinking more than usual since their confrontation. Not enough to be obviously drunk, but enough that Sarah could smell it on his breath when he spoke to her. He'd started staying up late, sitting in his chair in the living room, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something colder, something that made her skin crawl. That Wednesday night, Sarah went to bed at her usual time, 10:30. Michael was still downstairs watching television, nursing another beer. She'd hoped he would stay there until she fell asleep, but around midnight, she heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs. He didn't come to bed immediately. Instead, she heard him moving around the house, opening and closing doors, walking from room to room as if he was looking for something. Sarah lay in the darkness, every muscle in her body tense, listening to his movements and trying to guess his intentions. When Michael finally entered their bedroom, Sarah pretended to be asleep. She could feel him standing next to the bed, looking down at her, and she had to concentrate on keeping her breathing steady and even. After what felt like forever, she heard him moving toward his dresser. That's when she smelled it. Gasoline. Sarah's eyes flew open, and she saw Michael standing by the window, holding a red gas can in one hand and a box of matches in the other. In the moonlight streaming through the curtains, his face looked like a stranger's. "Michael?" she whispered, sitting up in bed. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he began pouring gasoline in a line across the bedroom floor, from the door to the window. The smell was overwhelming in the enclosed space, making Sarah's eyes water. "You made me look like a fool," he said finally, his voice eerily calm. 36 years of marriage, and you made me look like a fool." Sarah scrambled out of bed, her nightgown catching on the sheets. "Michael, please, we can talk about this. We can work through this." "Work through what?" He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that terrified her more than the gasoline, more than the matches. She saw complete absence. The man she'd married, the father of her children, the person she'd shared her life with for more than half her existence, was gone. What stood in his place was something cold and merciless. "Work through the fact that you've been lying to me since we met. Work through the fact that I don't even know who I'm married to. Work through the fact that you made me into a joke." Sarah backed toward the bedroom door, but Michael had positioned himself between her and the exit. The gasoline fumes were making her dizzy, or maybe it was the terror. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely coordinate her movements. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I was trying to protect our family. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Michael's laugh was harsh and bitter. "You destroyed me. You destroyed everything we built together. Did you think I was stupid? Did you think I'd never find out? I hoped. It didn't matter. I loved you. I chose you. I chose this life. You chose to lie to me every single day for 36 years. Sarah could see there was no reasoning with him. His mind had twisted her lifelong struggle into a personal attack against him. Her decades of silent pain had become, in his narrative, a calculated deception designed to humiliate him. "The children," she said desperately. "Think about Jennifer, Thomas, Lisa. They need both of us. Don't do this to them." For a moment something flickered in Michael's eyes, something that might have been doubt or regret. But then it hardened again. "They'll understand when they know the truth," he said, "when they know what kind of person you really are." Michael struck the first match. The small flame illuminated his face, making him look demonic in the darkness. Sarah watched in horror as he held it for a moment, looking at her with what might have been satisfaction. "Please," she whispered one last time. He dropped the match. The gasoline ignited instantly, creating a wall of fire between Sarah and the bedroom door. The flames spread faster than she'd ever imagined possible, racing along the trail Michael had created, climbing the curtains, consuming everything in their path. Sarah ran to the window, desperate to escape, but they were on the second floor, and the drop to the concrete patio below would likely kill her just as surely as the fire. She could hear Michael's footsteps in the hallway, moving away from the bedroom, leaving her trapped. The smoke was thick and black, filling her lungs, making it impossible to breathe. Sarah grabbed a pillow and pressed it against her face, trying to filter the air, but she knew it was hopeless. The room was becoming an oven, and she was going to die. In those final moments, Sarah Williams thought about her children. She thought about the grandchildren she'd never meet, the conversations she'd never have, the simple pleasures she'd never enjoy again. She thought about the secret she'd carried for so long, the truth about herself that she'd been too afraid to share, and she wondered if honesty would have saved her life or ended it sooner. She also thought about Michael, and despite everything, despite the flames consuming her flesh, she felt sorry for him. Sorry for the fear and anger that had twisted him into someone capable of murder. Sorry for the life they might have had if they'd learned how to talk to each other honestly. Sorry for the man he'd been before rage poisoned his heart. The neighbors called 911 when they saw flames in the upstairs windows. Mrs. Peterson from next door would later tell reporters that she'd heard screaming, awful sounds that would haunt her dreams for years to come. The fire department arrived within 6 minutes, but the upper floor was already fully engulfed. They found Sarah's body in the bedroom, burned beyond recognition. The medical examiner would later determine that she'd died from smoke inhalation before the flames reached her, a small mercy in an otherwise merciless act. They found Michael in his garage, sitting in his truck with the engine running and the garage door closed. He'd intended to die by carbon monoxide poisoning, but the garage door had a small gap at the bottom, and the ventilation was too good. When the firefighters broke down the door, he was unconscious, but alive. Michael Williams survived to face justice for what he'd done to the woman who'd loved him for 36 years. The arrest of Michael Williams sent shockwaves through the small Ohio community that had known the couple for decades. Neighbors who had chatted with Sarah about gardening and weather couldn't reconcile the woman they'd known with the person described in news reports. Friends from church struggled to understand how a marriage that had seemed stable, if not particularly happy, could end in such horrific violence. The media attention was intense and often cruel. Local news stations ran stories with headlines like "Husband Burns Wife Alive After Shocking Discovery" and "The Secret That Destroyed a 36-Year Marriage." Talk radio hosts debated the case endlessly, often focusing more on Sarah's gender identity than on the crime that had been committed against her. Michael Williams was charged with first-degree murder, arson, and attempted suicide. His bail was set at $2 million, which his family couldn't afford, so he remained in county jail while awaiting trial. His court-appointed attorney, a young public defender named Rebecca Chen, faced the challenge of defending a man who had confessed to burning his wife alive. During the pre-trial phase, the prosecution and defense battled over what evidence would be admissible. The district attorney, James Morrison, wanted to present Sarah's gender identity as a motive for the murder. Chen argued that her client's mental state was more relevant than his victim's personal struggles. "This case isn't about gender identity," Chen told the judge during one particularly heated hearing. "It's about a man who suffered a complete psychological break and committed an unthinkable act. My client needs treatment, not vengeance." But Morrison saw it differently. The defendant didn't have a psychological break, he argued. He made a calculated decision to murder his wife because he felt betrayed and humiliated. This was a hate crime, pure and simple. The trial began on a rainy Monday in March, nearly 5 months after Sarah's death. The courthouse was packed with reporters, community members, and advocates from both sides of the gender identity debate. Outside, protesters held signs reading, "Justice for Sarah," while counter-protesters displayed messages about traditional marriage and protecting families. Jennifer, Thomas, and Lisa Williams sat in the front row throughout the trial, their faces masks of grief and confusion. They'd lost both parents that October night, one to murder, one to the justice system. In victim impact statements, they struggled to reconcile their memories of their mother with the person described in court. "My mom made the best chocolate chip cookies," Jennifer testified through tears. "She taught me how to braid my hair and helped me with my math homework. She was gentle and kind and never hurt anyone. She didn't deserve to die like that, no matter what she was struggling with privately." The prosecution's case was straightforward. They presented evidence of Michael's premeditation, his internet search history showing research into gender identity issues, his purchase of gasoline 2 days before the murder, witness testimony about his increasingly agitated behavior in the weeks following his discovery about Sarah. Dr. Patricia Henley, a forensic psychologist, testified about the psychological profile of men who commit intimate partner violence. "These crimes often stem from a need to maintain control," she explained. "When that control is threatened, either by a partner's attempt to leave or by information that challenges the perpetrator's sense of identity, the result can be explosive and deadly." The defense strategy was more complex. Chen didn't deny that Michael had killed Sarah, but she argued that he'd suffered a severe psychological break triggered by what he perceived as the collapse of his reality. She brought in her own expert witnesses to testify about the psychological impact of discovering that a longtime partner had been hiding fundamental aspects of their identity. Dr. Robert Steinberg, a psychiatrist specializing in relationship trauma, testified that Michael's reaction, while extreme and inexcusable, was understandable given his psychological makeup. Mr. Williams built his entire sense of self around traditional gender roles and heterosexual marriage, Steinberg explained. When he discovered information that challenged those foundations, he experienced what we might call an existential crisis that manifested in violence. But the prosecution countered with evidence that Michael's reaction wasn't spontaneous, but calculated. Security camera footage from a gas station showed him filling the container 2 days before the murder. Internet search records revealed he'd been researching methods of arson for over a week. This wasn't a moment of temporary insanity, Morrison argued in his closing statement. This was a deliberate, planned execution of a woman whose only crime was living her truth as quietly and privately as possible. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned with their verdict, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of Sarah's children quietly weeping, guilty on all charges. Michael Williams was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, he showed no emotion. He'd barely spoken during the entire trial, sitting at the defense table with the same blank expression that neighbors had seen in his eyes that terrible night. In the months following the trial, Sarah's story became a rallying point for transgender rights advocates. Even though she'd never publicly identified as transgender and had apparently tried to suppress any questioning of her gender identity throughout her life. Support groups formed in her memory, and the local Methodist church where she'd worshipped for 3 decades held a memorial service that drew hundreds of attendees. But for every person who saw Sarah as a victim of hate and intolerance, there was another who focused on Michael's perspective, who saw him as a man betrayed by deception, rather than destroyed by his own inability to accept complexity and nuance in the people he claimed to love. The case raised uncomfortable questions about marriage, honesty, and acceptance. How much do we really know about the people closest to us? What secrets are we all carrying? And what happens when the fear of rejection becomes so overwhelming that we choose silence over truth, even when that silence might ultimately be more dangerous than honesty? Dr. Amanda Foster, a marriage counselor who followed the case closely, offered this perspective. Healthy relationships require emotional safety for both partners to be authentic. When people feel they have to hide fundamental aspects of themselves to maintain their relationships, both partners suffer. Sarah lived in fear for decades, and Michael lived with a partner he never really knew. That's not love. That's survival. The Williams children struggled with their own questions and guilt. Had they missed signs that their mother was suffering? Could they have done something to prevent the tragedy? Thomas Williams spoke to reporters months after the trial, his voice heavy with regret. "I keep thinking about all the conversations we never had," he said. "All the times Mom seemed sad or distant, and we just accepted it as normal. We should have asked more questions. We should have made her feel safer to talk to us." Michael Williams remains in prison, serving his life sentence in a facility 3 hours away from the town where he'd lived his entire adult life. According to prison records, he's had no visitors since his sentencing. His children have not spoken to him since the night he murdered their mother. For 36 years, Sarah Williams thought silence would keep her safe. She believed that hiding her truth was an act of love, a sacrifice she made to protect her family and preserve her marriage. She was wrong. Her silence didn't protect anyone. It created a powder keg that eventually exploded, destroying everything she'd tried to preserve. Michael Williams thought his masculinity depended on controlling and understanding his wife completely. When faced with information that challenged his assumptions, he chose violence over compassion, murder over growth. He destroyed the woman he claimed to love rather than expand his definition of love itself. This story isn't just about gender identity or domestic violence. It's about the deadly consequences of shame, fear, and the inability to accept complexity in the people we claim to cherish. It's about the price we pay when we choose comfort over truth, control over understanding. What do you think? Was this about betrayal, or was it about a man's refusal to love his wife as she truly was? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more shocking true crime stories that reveal the hidden darkness in seemingly ordinary lives.